All right, hello, and welcome to the first episode of our new podcast, the Town Chronicles. I'm your host, Michael Herbert, and this series is designed to bring more of your local government to you and your home. Each month, we are going to talk about important things happening in the town of Ashland, how they impact you, and most importantly, how you can get involved in shaping the town of Ashland for the future. Each episode, we're going to bring on one or two guests that are involved in different aspects of municipal government and get their perspectives on today's issues and a little bit about how they got involved in local government. Today, we have two very special guests, our Assistant Town Manager, Jen Ball, and Select Board Member Joe Magnani, our longest-serving Select Board member, I should say. And today's episode, we're really going to focus more on a retrospective of the last 10 or 12 years or so in Ashland and really how we got to the place where we are today. And it's, like I said before, in the future, we'll talk about more current issues and talk about how residents can get involved in shaping Ashland's future. So, as I said before, my name is Michael Herbert. I'm actually the town manager here in Ashland and have been for the last 8 years. A lot of people may wonder what is a town manager? And really at its core level, the select board and the town manager, they provide the executive leadership for the town of Ashland. Our select board acts as the chief elected body in town, and they appoint a town manager who functions as the CAO and the CFO of the community. So that's a little bit of my role. I've been fortunate to, I've been town manager for 8 years, but I've been here for almost 11. First, I was the assistant town manager and finance director. So I've been privy to a lot of changes happening in town, and actually have been fortunate enough to help be a part of a lot of that stuff. So without further ado, Jen, welcome.
Hello.
Good to see you here. Joe, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. Jen, you're the assistant town manager, and you were one of my first hires, and probably my most important. As I always commonly say, the right hand and the left hand of the organization. But you've been with me every step of the way since I've been town manager, and so you've seen a lot of things happening here in town and a lot of changes. But one of the things I really want to know from you is what has been, from a project perspective, what has been the most important one for you on a professional level?
So I think that's a really hard question to answer. I think there's been a number of projects that I'm really proud of. And if I had to think of one, I won't be able to. So I'm thinking of sort of two that sort of rise to the top. One, Joe will be able to sort of speak to, as well as obviously the new public safety building, helping bring that project to fruition. It was incredibly complicated. It was incredibly valuable to the departments, but then also the community. And so that was really rewarding project, and it took probably 3 or 4 years of sort of time and effort.
3 or 4 years. I think you're being optimistic there.
Well, of my sort of full focus, I think that the community had worked on it for probably a decade.
Oh gosh, yeah, it was. Joe, do you have any insights and thoughts about it? I mean, gosh, we really started working on this, I think, in 2017 when we started doing a site analysis.
You're right, Michael, and a lot of that insight came from years of talking about having a new location and having a new building, and it progressed from. I mean, this started with Bob Gonfrati when he was the chief.
Yeah, that was back in the 80s, right?
Actually late 70s. Early 80s when that discussion started, because when we moved into the old police station, it was brand spanking new when we moved in. And the unfortunate thing was it was too small and not the right fit for the department. There was no future sight for, progressive thinking of having women on the department at that time, even though we had 3 women working full time as police officers and dispatchers and stuff. But unfortunately, there was no place for them to get dressed, this, that, and so there was no real thought and effort put into it. It was a design idea, and it became an architectural design more than a functioning police station. So that's how that started. That's how it worked. Bobby Gonfrati was really, disappointed that they didn't have much say into that building as what we were able to provide for the fire and police department, their departments and personnel that are working in that building. So, yeah, it was.
Yeah, it's funny, when I was putting the guest list together for this first episode, I thought about it just from a perspective of who's been here the longest. But you're right, both of you have been instrumental in the public safety building, and again, that was a really critical project for the town. And I think one of the things I was most proud of as town manager is actually the votes that we took, or that the community took to move this project forward. But it was also not just the public safety building, but it was the Mendez School. And both of them passed with almost 90% of the vote, pretty much the same. And I really felt like that was just highlighted the partnership that we have with the school department and the way we feel is like a community. And, before we start talking a little bit more about projects and everything, I probably should have rewound the tape back a little bit to how we got here. So folks, just let everybody know we're winging it here. We don't have a script, so we're doing the best we can. So if we jump from one place to another, just bear with us. But I think when I started here, one of the things that I found was that there was a lot of arguments happening amongst committees, amongst different departments, and I found that a lot of energy was being, I think, wasted on small things. And so, one of my goals was to help everybody. I think just kind of bring everybody together. And one of the things I noticed is that if we could carve out some funds to do some of these projects, these community development and infrastructure projects, and professionalize our departments a little bit, or add departments, if we could find some funding to do that, that would probably solve a lot of those arguments and complex relationships, or add to those complex relationships. And so really what we tried to do at the very beginning, this was, back when Tony Sciabi was the town manager and I was the assistant, really started trying to carve out money from fixed costs, reducing fixed costs. Like we moved our insurance to the GIC, and thanks to the employees for being willing to do that. We also did a lot of energy efficiency upgrades. And that actually freed up the money to do a lot of the things that we're talking about, or that we're going to talk about today. But, in addition to the public safety building, Jen, you were heavily involved in the Riverwalk project, which I like to refer to as Ashland's first nice-to-have project. It wasn't necessarily steak and potatoes type infrastructure work, but maybe you can give a little bit of insight into what all went into that project and making it the gem that it is today.
Sure. So this was another project that the community had been working on for about a decade, and we were able to sort of take it from concept and design to sort of allocate the proper funding and bring it to fruition. And so really working with the Open Space and Recreation Committee, who had been working on it and getting permits for, I believe, 8 years before we had implemented. It was a larger project. It was one of the largest projects that I had worked on up to that date. And it was complex, meaning we had to figure out a way to have a pedestrian bridge over Mill Pond to connect the actual walking trail that existed as part of the Bay Circuit to our Mill Pond Park. And we also had to work with several landowners just to make sure that we're able to access the entire trail, and it connects down to Ponderosa. There's a vision that we'll be able to connect downtown. Initially, we were hoping to connect at the VFW and then maybe Marathon Park. And so we're sort of still looking at that. So we're finished phase 1. It's just a little over a mile. And there's a component that is ADA accessible that brings you to a beautiful observation platform so that everybody in the community can enjoy nature. I think one of the best parts of that project is that it was intended to invite people who would maybe not feel super comfortable going into many of the other trails that we have in town, whether it's either in the state forest the state park or the town forest. And so this is very accessible to anybody It's well used. I think there's been some really beautiful pictures. I think in the fall, it's the most beautiful with the bridge and the foliage in the park. And so I think it's really met its goal of bringing people to really appreciate the trail systems that we have in town, and sort of introducing a whole segment of people to just our beautiful natural resources.
Yeah, and I think that project was, I think, 25 years in the making. I think Dave Foster, John Ellsworth, Rob St. Germain, I think back in the day, they kind of cut the initial trail, but and an open space and recreation committee kind of took the ball and got the first step of engineering done. And then, it was really up to us, I think, to kind of figure out how we're going to implement this and make it a reality. But you're right. You come downtown in the fall and you see so many people, and a lot of them from out of town. I know this just because I chat with them because, well, that's what I do, is talk. And, it's just become, I think, just that anchor point, I think, for downtown, especially in the fall. One of the things that is also coming is on the other side of that bridge next to the Historical Society. There was that observation platform. And so that just became a little bit too old to be safe. And so we're replacing that. But we've actually exposed the old sluiceway that fed the mill across the street. And so we're going to make that the walkway, the old sluiceway. And so that'll be pretty cool. Hope everybody enjoys that. But Joe, you've been around for so long. I'm trying to say that as respectful as possible.
Yeah, you can say it.
Not as old as dirt, but you've been around since for a bit, and you've seen a lot of changes here. But not just from a project perspective, but just a community perspective. What do you think's been the biggest changes you've seen since you've been on the select board?
Well, thank you. I would say that the population has changed dramatically. I mean, the diversity of the folks that are coming in. With the Indian population, Russians population, very large on the west part of the town, the southwest part of the town, in the condos area, and it's nice to have the diversity. It's nice to see more people of color coming into this community and being accepted. Where earlier, when I was younger, there weren't many families that of color in town, and you could count on one hand how many there were. But back in that day, I mean, the folks and the kids that were going to school, they didn't see anybody of color. They just saw a friend. They just saw a person. They didn't get into that. We weren't into this. And again, the radical movement in the late '60s, early '70s was very prevalent. So Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy, and the reform of racial reform was happening back then,
right?
And Ashland didn't have a lot of that, but they were able to live with each other in harmony, and there wasn't an issue. We never saw it as an issue growing up as kids in the school system or whatever. But that's probably one of the main things. And there was a lot of open space back then.
Yeah,
and unfortunately, there was a baby boom, and there was a population boom in this area. And it's still happening, more families are moving into town. So the open fields and the lands that we used to hang around in and play or whatever has been taken away. So it became a focus for several boards that I sat on to purchase some of that open space and keep it that way.
You're starting with like Warren Woods.
Warren Woods, right.
Yeah.
And then some of the properties that abutted the town forest along Oregon Road,
Icolo property, and north of Lincoln.
Right. So, I mean, those areas in and of itself, I mean, that's nice. And I'm happy that we were able to do that because it brings back some, great memories of what Ashland used to be before it was all developed. And we're almost out to that capacity right now. I mean, we're getting very close to it.
Yeah, the whole build out analysis, that's coming as part of the comprehensive plan, which is something that we'll talk about in a future episode. But Joe, I like to say that, sometimes our best work happens when things don't happen. And, you talk about purchasing of open space and to keep that land from being developed. And Ashland actually over the last 10 years has spent over $10 million on open space protection and acquisition. And we've got, creative ways to, protect open space without just buying it. Like, so we found some very generous landowners who would be willing to put deed restrictions on their property if we bought abutting parcels as open space. And it's made, I think, a huge difference in town. But then people don't necessarily see that. They just know that it's not being developed. And sometimes they don't even realize that the town has acquired that property and protected it for posterity.
Right.
But yeah, open space has definitely been a big priority, I think, for the town, and that's something that we've seen in surveys and everything.
And with population growth, you have children that are coming into the community, so your school system is going to be affected by that. They're going to need more space and more room, and then the social aspect of children, and a lot of that social aspect comes with sports and activities, and so now you need fields. To provide those areas of programs for kids to have fun in. So now there was a field issue, and a lot of the discussion came about, do we want regular natural turf or do we want, artificial turf? And in the long run, with all the discussions and the committees that were developed, it came down to common sense. It was going to be a lot of money to keep the natural turf, which needed resting period, and you don't have enough grass fields to be maintained. They'd let one field rest before season and utilize something else. So the turf option was used, and it's been working pretty well. The unfortunate thing is there was a time when we didn't have someone maintaining the fields to the point renting the fields, and we lost many opportunities to generate revenue.
Yeah,
unfortunately, to maintain those fields. And now the other towns around us have developed their options to purchase, turf fields. So, the rental is not there as it was, 10, 15 years ago. So
you always got to recalibrate, right?
Oh, right. Yeah. Always
out. Okay.
You have to relook at everything as the
plan. And then, okay, something goes awry, and then you have to kind of look at a contingency plan. And that's kind of where we're.
And unfortunately, we didn't do that. We were just initially hoping to get, fields available for the kids to be able to play. And so far it's worked, other than, the rental aspect of it. But
yeah. And so now, I think it's safe to say that our athletic programs, especially the youth sports programs, have outgrown our current field capacity. And I know there's plenty of demand for new fields. Moving beyond infrastructure, though, we've changed a lot as an organization. And Jen, you've been a key part of that, and you lead a number of departments. I think we've added a few departments like HR. We've added an economic development department, but one of the things that we really worked hard on when we started working together was this human services and prevention program. And maybe you can talk a little bit about that and what that's meant to you, both personally and professionally, and how it's helped people here in Ashland.
Sure. So when I came on, we had a youth and family services division as part of our community center. And so we always had a caseworker, and we had a longstanding food pantry that certainly meets, with the help of the emergency fund, the needs of people struggling with food insecurity. And that we've maintained that as a vital part of the new department. And so the department has really evolved. Initially, we brought on a licensed social worker and created a human services department that really was focused on sort of doing wraparound services for our most vulnerable residents that might struggle with housing, they might struggle with mental health, they might struggle with substance abuse or misuse. And we've grown that just in terms of now including prevention. So Decisions at Every Turn has been working incredibly hard in the community with school-aged prevention programs, and also really run by parents in town that really are focusing on education around substance abuse, and as sort of we've streamed through COVID, really focusing on mental health crisis and what that actually what that does to the adult population, and also how it leads to substance misuse and abuse. Mm-hmm. And so they were grant funded for 10 years, and they had a coordinator, and we've systematically sort of stepped off of that grant and incorporated Kristen French, who is now our Director of Prevention and Human Services, into the town. So I think that's a huge feather in the cap of decisions at every turn in terms of really institutionalizing prevention into our organization. It's something that you and I have really believed in from go. And really worked to make sure that we could incorporate her and keep their mission alive. And so now she's leading the department and incorporating prevention as much as we can in all aspects of our program. So working to have prevention messages in recreation programs, in the library programs, partnering throughout the community, and then also continuing our partnership with the schools. We have a really strong partnership with both the middle school and the high school in terms of some of their campaigns. Human Services continues to grow and is incredibly busy.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Really trying to deal with giant problems of housing, which obviously, there's a staff of 2.5. We have 2 full-time caseworkers. One is a licensed social worker and the other a caseworker, and then a part-time food pantry coordinator there. And really sort of working on housing, food insecurity, mental health, working with the police in terms of crisis intervention and their jail diversion program. And so it's been really a successful program. It's meeting a real critical and essential need in the community. And sort of as we can address those and help them connect them with social services throughout the region, and we can help people to sort of live a more fulfilling and stable life, the better the community is. And sort of we've definitely had a huge program. A part of it is which most people probably have heard of, is probably the holiday program.
Yeah.
So that's really connecting donors within this incredibly generous community to families who may not be able to provide gifts for their children during the holiday season. And it's a really beautiful community building program in which we have, over 100 people being donors, meeting the needs of over 100, and I believe it was 120 families this year. So that is sort of probably the most well-known, but there's all this work that's happening year-round that never really gets talked about because it is confidential, and but they're incredibly busy day to day.
Yeah. And Joe, just from your perspective, you've been part of the organization that's the town of Ashland for many years. First as an officer, for a couple of decades at least, right? And then as a member of the select board, there was a period of overlap there. But from your perspective, what do you think has changed the most among our organization?
What's interesting is the fact that in some of the programs that Jen just talked about and mentioned, they actually started as grassroots programs when I was affiliated with the police department. We had drug prevention programs that, they were grant funded by state and federal programs. Those monies have since gone and dried up. So I'm happy to see that, decisions at every turn has taken over what we used to do. And it was just one person. It was me, myself, and I that would go into the schools and do other things. Isabel Harrison, if you don't mind me mentioning her name.
Of course not.
She was very involved with the families.
Isabel's a legend here.
And she, some of the programs that she talked about, like the holiday program. Town hall, you couldn't go downstairs because that was the main focus of all the gift drop-offs and everything down the cellar before the changeover was made. And so, everybody was part of that. Police, fire, even town employees would go down, they would wrap gifts or whatever people would be dropping off. And that also was the home base for the food pantry as well. Especially now where I think Brittany's office and the office next to her.
Brittany, our finance director.
Sure, right.
Yep.
And the open, reference conference room A, which is now I call it the COVID.
Yeah, the COVID headquarters.
The COVID headquarters, right? So, that was the area of concern where everybody would pile all the food and everything and get the baskets all sent out. And it was a whole town project. Firefighters, police officers would deliver the foods and Lions members would be involved. So, it makes me happy to see that these projects just didn't go by the wayside like the dodo bird.
Right.
Right. They progress and have flourished into these great programs that are funded through town resources and the tax base. So when people say our taxes are too high, or they may be high, but when you think of all the social programs that have come out of this, it's heartwarming. Ashland is very special that way. We do what we have to do for those that are in need, and charity starts at home. And what else would be a place to have it continue, but what within the town itself? So I don't know if I answered that properly, but
and I also think we cognitively sort of looked at and really were trying to be respectful of all the work that had been done. And so building off of the holiday program and, everybody in that department still talks about Isabel Harris and all the work that was done in the past. And then sort of building off of that to just try to make it, 1%, 10% better. I think even just changing the name from Youth and Family, which many other towns still maintain that. We sort of looked at, so if you're not a youth and you're not a family, we still want to make sure that they know that there is a place for them to go. And if they need assistance, we can still help them. There is a sort of direct correlation also to our senior outreach worker to make sure that the seniors are receiving the services that they need. We love the fact that it's at the community center, even if it's sort of, sometimes we're a little squished for space, particularly in the food pantry. But the connections that you have there, you have the recreation department there. So you already have young people, you have the seniors who, may not go someplace else if they need services. So it sort of does work, and it does feel much more community. And the holiday program still has, the fire department, the police department still participate and assist with that. We do have members of the Lions that are definitely volunteering their time. And so it's sort of building on all of that that happened in previous.
But it comes in time. Maybe it's just like when you take a walk into the woods, sometimes you go in an area where no one's gone before. So you're the pathway, you're the first one to go through. So it's nice to see that progress. And now where it was a path, it's now a crosswalk, or it's a walkway, so people can utilize it more. There's more benefit to it. So to hear all of this, I mean, I sit back and I smile and say, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you to everybody that's taken that torch and continued doing the things that we started, because those folks haven't been forgotten. And that's the needy. And that's quite important for me. I mean, it's, we were a small town back then. We didn't have a lot. There wasn't a lot. There weren't any rich people. I mean, we were all, blue collar workers. There wasn't, we weren't the Shervins. We weren't, the Wellesleys or Whites. Right. So we all had to work, and whatever we were able to contribute to help the community, that's what we've done. And I take full acknowledgement that the both of you, when you came on board, even as an assistant town manager, a lot of the work that was done behind the scenes by the both of you. And, other credit may have been given to other individuals, but you guys were the folks that, were the ones that the overview was overseers of the work that was really being done that made a difference. So that was my observation when I first got on. And I will continue that observation, because you folks are very endearing to me, because I've watched what you have done and made Ashland a lot better, but not for the children, for the entire community as a whole.
Thanks.
We bridged the gap. Yeah. And I know we're going to jump over some things, but we bridged the gap between when we first started.
Joe, I might invite you back again. I mean, you got to keep on with this.
Well, it's people were butting heads, departments were butting heads. It was us versus them.
Yeah.
Attitude. And when we saw and we looked at policies that would be beneficial for everybody to utilize, I mean, cooler heads prevailed. Everybody agreed that this may be the right approach to take. And that policy is in effect right now, and I hope it stays that way. Maybe there's always a little tweak that needs to be done, but all in all, I mean,
you're talking about the financial
aspect of it, right? I mean, any new monies that come in is a 70-30 split, and the way it should be, and everybody benefits by it. It's not, well, we need this more than no. It's we're in this together, and I think that attitude has fostered a better and a great change of how budgetary thought processes are being done in this community. Yeah. And much better than other communities around us.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, we're fortunate to have great relationships with the superintendent and school committees and the finance committee. And finance can be a little bit boring, but it's really kind of the foundation of any type of organization and any kind of public services, because unless you have money, you can't really do anything. You can't put cops on the street. You can't patch roads. You can't do some of these projects that we're doing. And so, yeah, that was a pretty important thing that we did, because, it also, not only did it carve out money for the projects that we're doing today, but it also started addressing our long-term liabilities. And so we're planning for the future as well, so we don't get caught off guard. And we're not totally kicking the can down the road. We're taking care of things like our OPEB liability, which is health insurance for retirees. It's a fancy name for that. And then also our rainy day fund, which has been key. But Joe, just getting back to the projects, one of the things that, you and I kind of shared a moment with was something that's very near and dear to my heart, which is the downtown project. And I can remember you and me and Carl kind of walking. Yeah, the walk. We'll call it the walk.
Oh.
Yeah, down Main Street, and just kind of envisioning what it would look like with the poles underground and everything. And what do you think about the evolution of that project? We're not finished yet. We still have to get the poles down.
We're almost there. And it was funny. I was in the company with Kyle a couple of days ago, and we were talking about that. And I said, "Remember the walk?" He goes, "Oh yeah, the walk was that actually started that movement to let's do it."
Yeah,
and the discussion came out. Yeah, we make the sidewalks better, and beautiful crosswalks, the whole 9 yards to beautify downtown. Well, it'll be beautifying downtown. Get rid of the poison button. Get rid of the bloody.
We got a few sound effect buttons here, which we haven't tried yet.
Get rid of the bloody, wires and hang, telephone poles out, and put them out of sight, put them onto the ground. And that initial discussion actually came. It came to fruition, and within the next year or two.
Yeah, I'm gonna press a button. There we go.
There you go.
Look at that.
We downtown.
Yeah, downtown. and it's come, and people are happy with it.
Yeah,
especially this past year during the holiday season.
Oh my gosh,
it was incredible. It was absolutely incredible.
Yeah,
to see all the people, do the holiday stroll and getting the business folks involved in it. Beth has done a great job, and
Beth Reynolds, our economic development director.
Town hall looks so pretty.
Oh, it looks very. And it'll continue. You go from one building to the next, and hopefully we can put funding, make a line item of that, and hopefully that, and maybe the business community sees that and helps towards that as well. So we could all do that. So, but it was very, very nice, and I know Santa was very happy to see it when he came down and saw all those. He was very, very impressed how Ashland got into the holiday spirit real quickly.
Yeah, and Santa's the guy to impress that time of year.
It certainly is.
It's Santa. Santa is really, really. Santa, when he comes to Ashland,
his favorite spot.
It is favorite spot, and I will have to say, I have a personal experience with that and I like to share because my daughter, when I started here, she was 3 years old, and believe it or not, she wasn't totally convinced about Santa. And when Santa came to town one year, she went and got on Santa's lap, and Santa knew exactly what she wanted. And I remember her getting on that lap, and Santa saying, "Oh, well, I hear you want." I think it was like a Princess Sophia the First castle. I think that's what she was into at the time. And I tell you, her just smiled, like this amazed look on her face. And she came out of that little hut a believer. So I always got a special place in my heart for Santa here in town. Jen, what are some of the other projects that you really like and are proud of? I mean, we've got so many. We got 126. We've got the Mendez School. We talked about the public safety building. Any of those or ones that I didn't mention that really kind of resonate with you?
I mean, all of those for sure. I mean, I think all of them have a part in sort of transforming the physical part of our community. I do love sort of programs also. I think we've come a long way in our programs. I think at the library we have a
a crazy amount of programs.
Oh, yeah,
Any
Nina's
given
done
day, you can
amazing job.
find something that you're interested in. I think with recreation and our seniors sort of just keep building on programs. And I think sometimes when we're thinking about community, we think about the physical places. And sometimes I think we also need to think about the programmatic, where you can actually connect with some people that you may not otherwise cross paths with. And I think that is invaluable. And I think our staff does an amazing job with that. I'm lucky enough to be part of Ashland is United that also does programs. Like Breaking Bread, which actually Joe was at.
yeah, that was
It was
a
just
great
very
program.
cool
That was
program.
awesome.
And
I'm waiting for it to come up again, to do
Yeah.
that again. That was awesome.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun.
yeah, so they do sort of programs intentionally connecting people that might not otherwise cross paths. And I think if we're talking about physical projects, another project super proud of is the Trolley Brook Trail, which,
yeah.
on its face, you're thinking it's less than a mile. It was sort of the easiest piece of the Upper Charles Trail because we owned the property, but it was one of the projects that really sort of far surpassed my vision. Like, I was really surprised, and now I walk it almost every day. But it's a beautiful path that, you're weirdly sort of transplanted or something into the woods from Magunko Road.
Yeah,
You
Magunko,
walk
which is probably the most industrial, next to
Location,
Nickerson Road off
yeah.
126, Magunko's pretty
Yeah.
industrial, and then you just walk into this environmental, beauty.
Yeah, it's like almost magical in a way that it sort of brings you to this place from, like you said, the most industrial. You're walking not on a sidewalk through the street, and then you end up on this beautiful path for a little bit of a mile. That project was surprisingly satisfying in terms of what I had envisioned, and then to actually see it. And again, it's the start of something that will be much, much bigger. That will take likely years and years and years
Yeah,
to
the
come.
Upper Charles Trail,
Yeah.
which we're making some
And when
progress.
it happens, it'll be a beneficial, beneficial for everybody, whether they ride bikes or they just walk the trail,
Right, right.
which would be nice. I'm sorry, I
no,
didn't mean
go
to
ahead.
interrupt you, Mike. The programs that you taught, that you had mentioned, these programs are essential for everybody. Not just groups of individuals, but for every sector of our community, from children to the seniors. And without these programs, you can build great buildings, but if you have nothing to provide activities for these programs, for these buildings, like you said, the library, my God, going back and look at what we had for a library, and they were very limited with what we have. And, we had almost the size of this studio was the children's aspect of it, which was downstairs in a musty old, basement. And they did the best that they could do. But now today, you have a vibrant children's library that is just so full of activity.
Oh, yeah.
And no wonder why parents love it, and support it.
Yeah, it's a good opportunity to give a shout out to Lois McAuliffe, who
Oh, my
her
goodness.
last day actually as the children's librarian was
Yesterday.
Yesterday, right.
And so she's been there for over a couple of decades. But Mina Jane, who has been our library director now 2-3 years, has just done an amazing job of bringing programs in, for sure. I think, one of the things I want to just kind of pivot towards is just talking about you two individually and why you got into, public service. And Joe, I'll ask you specifically, what made you decide to run for the select board?
Well, there was a discussion that was being had in front of a select board, at the time, a selectman board, that was actually shutting out people's opportunity to speak on a topic. And it happened to be, and this was the Warren Woods matter, that the whole project with Warren Woods, and it was in a discussion stage. And unfortunately, the folks that were on the as selectmen at the time, didn't want to hear it. So they shut the people down. And that's not what town government's about. Shutting, the voices of people should be heard, especially from elected officials. So it annoyed me. I can remember my father's voice telling me in my ear if you don't like what you see, and if you don't do anything, you're part of the problem.
Right.
So I said, okay. In my mind, I said, okay, that's it. I talked to my family to make sure it was okay with them, because I knew it was going to be time-consuming in the beginning.
Because we all know Donna runs the Magnani household.
Yeah. I wear the
let's be
skirt.
clear.
I'm not ashamed to say that my skirt's a little high right now, but yeah. And yeah, she's definitely the boss. There's no doubt about it. And in any Italian home, the mom's the boss. I don't care what people say.
Oh, for sure.
But anyway, long story short, they said fine, and so talked to some of my friends, and we started this campaign to run. I was very I was humbled by the support I got, and still received over the last 3 terms that I ran, and I hope people still trust and believe in me, and my heart is to do the right thing for the community. I know that the current board that I sit on, we still have that same process, and we all feel the same way. We still have a commitment to this town, and but that was one reason. It was just the lack of not being able to speak and be heard on a matter was very compelling to me, and I think it's be compelling to anybody. That's why I'm glad that we still have citizens' participation,
Right.
during our meetings.
Right.
Even now with Zoom, you have more people available to speak if they need to speak. So, but that was one of the reasons. And then other issues that we talked about, the public safety building, that was a big concern for me for over the years, and I'm very thankful that we were able to complete that. And to the young lady sitting to my right, Jen, she was the brick and mortar of this whole project, because
Sure.
she was the procurement officer, and she did more work behind the scenes than in front of us. So, a lot of kudos to her for the work that was done. And we still have a couple more things left to finish on that, but
Just a couple.
pretty soon we'll be able to dissolve that committee,
Yes.
because we're all,
That's right, Joe, of which you're the chair of. I should have mentioned that at the beginning. Jen kind of has the project manager, and Joe is the chair of the building committee.
I was the spokesperson, the person that did all the work. Unlike Paul Kendall with the school committee group, school buildings committee, this young lady was the one that did all the work.
Well, Jen did a lot, but don't discount the role that you had,
Well,
for sure.
For sure.
She gave me the latitude to do that, so thank you.
But yeah, Jen ran a tight ship on that project for sure. So
Especially with those people that were in the project and building the building itself.
Right.
You had site supervisors and stuff, but yeah, they would come to her, and Jen would make a quick phone call or two.
oh, for sure, yeah, and then things would happen for sure. Jen, what about you? I mean, so just a little bit for those of you that know. Well, you wouldn't know, the history. Jen and I have known each other for, 12, oh God, no, it's 14 years now, right? So we both worked at the city of Lowell for a while, but, you had been there for a while by the time I started in Lowell, but what got you into public service?
So I think I've always been sort of driven for community impact. So in Lowell, I actually had a very different role. I worked within the police department, really building programs. And so again, I think that's part of the reason why I think programs are so important. I saw that sort of the transformation it can have in an urban environment, and how much reach really small programs within one department could have. I moved to the state for a number of years, about 7 years. I worked for the Commonwealth and under the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security. And what drove me back is sort of the distance you have when you're in the state from actual community, and people, and sort of seeing any impact that anything that you're doing is making on a day-to-day basis. And so sort of driven back to come to a community and sort of put all of my energy into sort of helping transform a community. And I think Ashland has been really welcoming to me. And so I feel like all the work that I tend to be behind the scenes, sort of intentionally, but I can also see the change happening, and that's really fulfilling for me personally. And so I didn't have that necessarily when I was working on policy work. Even some of the real work that we were implementing, sort of essential services at MEMA, you don't actually see what's happening on the ground, and I think that's really important, and you can't get that anywhere else. And I really do love the sort of small town feel that Ashland still has, as opposed to some of the more urban areas that I've worked in, because you can really sort of be pretty flexible in some of the programs and some of the larger projects that we've worked on.
Yeah, cool. And I mean, I would say, I mean, one of my greatest blessings is actually getting to work with both of you, I think, and just the commitment that you bring to it, to the jobs, and the time that you put in. Joe, I mean, you're in a volunteer role, and you put in probably 40-hour weeks, and Jen, you know, you definitely put in 60, 70-hour weeks. But no, thank you for both going into that, and thanks, Melissa. Melissa, I was just about to ask for a time check. Melissa Hayes here. Let's give her a big round of applause for putting all of this together, as well as WACA and Paul Bowden and Barbara Chisholm. So I think we're going to wrap this episode up. We're about at the 40-minute, maybe close to 45-minute mark. But before we leave, we were going to try to do a trivia question. And Joe, you and I were talking a little bit about one. And so this is what I think we'll do. All right. So we're gonna have an email address, clocktownchronicles@ashlandmass.com. And so what we're going to do is we're going to ask a trivia question, and people who want to write in and give us the answer, just send it to clocktownchronicles@ashlandmass.com. Just got to remember to set that email address up. But anyway, we will. But Joe, what is the trivia question for this month?
So the trivia question this month, I have to be very careful because I don't want to give it away. But there was a project that was done in the early 20s, and it was a WPA project. So for the folks that were born and raised in Ashland, and even some of the newer ones who have done their history research, where was the WPA project done in Ashland?
So there was one WPA project?
There was one WPA project done in Ashland, and it was for the entire community. That's the hint.
Okay.
It was done for the, and where was it?
Interesting. So, yes, what was the WPA project in Ashland, and where was it? If you have the answer to that, write us at clocktownchronicles@ashlandmass.com. Folks, that's going to be it for this episode, our first episode, our inaugural episode. I want to thank both of my guests, Jen Ball and Joe Magnani, for being with us today and just explaining a little bit about their history here and kind of a recap of the last 10 or 12 years. Again, I want to thank Melissa Hayes, our communications coordinator, for putting all this together, and our friends at WACA, Barbara Chisholm and Paul Bowden, for setting all this up and kind of making it all work. It's like magic. So, folks, it's been great talking with you, and again, I hope you enjoy this. Actually, even if you don't have an answer to the trivia question, if you could just write us and let us know what you think about the podcast and what you would like to hear in the future. Again, use that email address, and we'll be sure to listen. So I want to bid everybody adieu, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.